Hey everybody, my name is Amanda Dare. Welcome to Sewing 101, Sewing Box to Basics. So basically we're going to teach you how to get your sewing machine out of the closet or out of the sewing box that it's sitting in right now, dust it off, and learn the basics of sewing. Today I'm joined by Krista, who is a sewing novice beginner. She has zero sewing experience, so she's going to be interacting and taking the class along with us. So if you hear from her or her questions, I just wanted to introduce Krista and say, hey girl. She's a longtime lover of the New Black, and I'm really excited to have her here. And she's the one who suggested the sewing classes. So listen, everybody's benefiting from her suggestion, so this is great. So first up, we have on the TMB Society a Sewing 101 class lesson plan that we're going to be following along with this class. So I have it up on my screen here. I'm just going to be going through this. So if you wanted to print that or open it on a different screen, that would be great. Krista has hers, so we're going to be kind of ready to go. So the first step on here is meeting me. So if you're in the society, you probably know who I am. My name is Amanda Dare, and I own The New Black, a sustainable and ethical clothing company that empowers women through their wardrobe. I've been sewing for 10 plus years. I started sewing actually when I was working at the Disney College program, and I was working in costuming and in theater. And I was like hanging out with seamstresses all day who were like making costumes, and I was like, man, I really want to learn how to do this. So I bought my sewing machine, made a really terrible pair of pajama pants while I was there, and just improved day after day and sewed a little bit every day to learn how to not mess stuff up the whole time. Main thing that I tell people about sewing is that it is a practice. So you're practicing sewing. It takes a lot of time to really get good at sewing, but through this and through these steps, hopefully you'll feel a little bit more confident when you leave our Sewing 101 class. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me and about, I don't think I have those terrible sewing or pajama pants anymore, so I wish I could show you, but they didn't fit anybody, none. And then 5 years after I was working in that, I actually started The New Black. So I've owned The New Black since 2015. It is now 2020, so we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. It's crazy. I'm really excited about it, but more excited just to teach more people how to sew, so I'm really excited. Okay, so if you go down to the next page, we're going to get started. So we're going to learn, or we're going to kind of look over what we're going to learn today. So we're going to learn about the tools of the trade, the terms, any tricks I can think of while we're going along, I'll definitely share with you guys. And then we're going to learn the sewing machine basics. So it's hard to see from right here, but I'll turn my camera. I have a whole array of items that I'm going to show you what each one of them are. I have my computer right in the way, sorry. And then I've got my home sewing machine here for you. Also a little plant, a little dress form, my cozy candle that I always have lit when I'm sewing because it's just really relaxing. So we'll go over all of these materials, and then we'll go over the sewing machine as well. Now this is the first time I have recorded anything, so like I usually teach this in person. So we'll see, we might have some little technical issues. I'll move the camera around a little bit, but if at any time you have questions in the TMB Society, you can message me directly and let me know. But yeah, we'll get started. So Krista, we're gonna go over all, oh my God, there's so many things, there's so many tools that I use all the time within the sewing world, but I'm going to start off with some of the basic ones. So we have here some scissors, yay. I mean, that's pretty easy. You can use any scissor really. I have some nice pairs. These are actually my great aunts that I inherited, so they're really nice. And then, oh, Krista, you asked a question. What's your question, Krista? I couldn't read it on here.
Do you have a supply list or like a list that could be with your Sewing 101 of your like favorite tools?
Of course. What a great suggestion. Thank you so much. So I have on the Sewing 101 just a list of tools, but I'm going to put together kind of a little, maybe even just like an Amazon list or a Joann's wish list, just so that you can get all these sewing tools whenever you need them. So great idea. Thanks for suggesting that. I'll kind of add it to the bottom of the page for Sewing 101 so that you guys know where to buy all these items. Yeah, so we've got these really great scissors. So I didn't buy these scissors, but I inherited them. They're really great. Ginger is a really great option for scissors. It's Gingher, and I'll definitely add that to the list. Ginger scissors are really a great cutting shear or pair of shears, and they usually make you feel really special and exciting because they usually have some kind of gold handle. I also have some that are full silver, but they're really great, a great option for you. Then we also have on here, I think it's a little further down, or actually I don't see it on this paper, but it's kind of included in the scissors category. These are snips. Now, snips are really easy. I use snips more often than I use my shears. So if I was cutting fabric, I would use my scissors. But if I'm just cutting a little piece of thread, then actual little snips are what sits by my sewing machine. And these are very inexpensive and easy to purchase, so I'll make sure to add those to the list. It's a little bit easier to use snips on a daily basis because if you look here, the shears you have to open and close, and just like, it's not very ergonomic. Ergonomic? Words are hard. But it's kind of, it hurts your hand if you've been actually like cutting with your shears all day long. Whereas if you're using your snips, you don't have to open it, it just stays open. So you just do a simpler motion. So for how much thread I cut every day, these are definitely a better option for me. There's some that come with like a little safety that keeps them closed as well. So you can definitely buy those too, but I like the easy, simple, the simpler the better with these little snips. All right, so next up is a seam ripper. So a seam ripper has a kind of curve at the top here, a little pinhead here, and then on the inside of this curve is actually a blade. So that's a little knife in there, and if you're taking apart a seam, you would separate it and then you would kind of ride this along that seam, and that little blade will actually cut your threads for you. Seam rippers are very, very important to get used to using. When you're a beginner seamstress, you're gonna need a seam ripper for sure. Sometimes you can also use your snips if you just have like 1 or 2 threads that you wanna get rid of, but a seam ripper is definitely one of those tools that everybody, no matter how experienced, you have to use it sometimes. You know, you have a little stitch go in the wrong spot or whatever. So definitely get yourself a seam ripper. A lot of times they'll come with a small one in your sewing kit or your with your sewing machine. So you might have had one actually come with your sewing machine as well, just depends on where you got it from. But there'll be a lot smaller options for that too. So definitely get a seam ripper. And you know, maybe I'll make like a little starter sewing kit or something, and we can sell that as like an additional thing so that we can gather all the supplies. And then I love the it's perfect. So Krista likes that idea. So I've bought 1 or 2 before from other places, but this is a little more comprehensive than it really needs to be, but we can get you some of those beginner things, some snips, maybe some extra needles, a really good seam ripper, and some of the other materials I talk about. Okay, so I'm just gonna go along my little display here. Let me actually close this and move it. Okay. Can you see that okay, Krista? probably pretty good. Yeah. Okay, so we already talked about the shears and the seam ripper, the snips. So let's talk next about pins. So these are straight pins, and this is actually on a magnet base. I'll tell you, a lot of people put straight pins into a cloth base that has a little kind of batting on the inside, and I just find that the magnet ones are much simpler to use because it's just attracted to it so much easier. And if you do, for some reason, spill a bunch of your pins, you can just run it along the floor and it'll pick them all up for you. So definitely a little magnetic pin holder would be a really great option, and a lot of straight pins. Straight pins are really inexpensive, or they should be really inexpensive. So if you're purchasing not that many for a high price, look around a little bit more because there's definitely a better option for you. And that is definitely something that would be in your beginner starter kit when I make it. All right, so the other types of pins I want to show you are, these are dressmaker's pin. It's really small and like a tailor's pin compared to a normal straight pin. If you're working on really delicate fabric, this pin is going to be a good option for you, but honestly, I barely ever use mine. So I would suggest mostly just using the straight pins. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a T-pin, and you can see it's bigger, it's heavier than the straight pin. So this T-pin, I almost use it only for this point at on my mannequins when I'm pinning stuff up in the store. But some people use it if it's a really heavy duty fabric. This will be a better option for you because you could actually bend this straight pin. So a T-pin is another option. Most likely you'll just be using the straight pins, these little guys. But those are two other options, kind of one that's a little bit more delicate and one that's a little more heavy duty. And then we have our trusty safety pin. And it opens and closes. I'm pretty sure everybody has seen a safety pin before. Now you won't actually use this while you're sewing, but if you're making adjustments or alterations to any garment, you're not going to want to use pins that are open on one edge. You're going to want to use a pin that has a closed edge so that you can pin on a person and not hurt them. It's pretty easy. But what's interesting is that when you take out your safety pins, a lot of people will actually use tailor's chalk. So tailor's chalk is another one of the things I would definitely put in the starter kit for you. And this one's a more waxy tailor's chalk. They have tailor's chalk that feels a little bit more like a traditional chalkboard chalk. But the waxy one is a little bit better. It actually stays on the garment a little bit better. So if you're doing alterations and you need to remove your safety pins, but you don't want to lose your marking spot, you would just mark it with this chalk. And it comes off really easily. All tailor's chalk would, which is ironing it or a little bit of water, it'll come right out. Usually you stitch over the spot that you mark, so it's not really a problem. Kind of goes into your seam. All right, so those are a few items. And then we've got a few different kind of rulers. So I don't have one of my large rulers here, but I do have one that I use all the time. That's a 6-inch by 24-inch ruler. It's a really good option to have, especially if you're going to be doing any kind of quilting or cutting on a rotary mat, which we'll talk about in a second. But the ones I use when I'm kind of up close and personal with my machine are this ruler, which again, I can find this option for you and add it to the list. But basically, this one's a really small one and it has a movable, you can see that, marker. So if I wanted to know where an inch was, I could set it on the inch. If I wanted to know where a 1/2 inch was, I could set it on the 1/2 inch. Sometimes when you're sewing and you've been looking at the same thing for such a long time, your eyes can be strained. We make black dresses with black thread. Your eyes can get really strained by looking at that all day. So having something that has a little bit more of the marker sitting out to the side is really nice and helpful if you're needing to do some kind of close-up work. And that would actually fit really nicely in the sewing kit. So I'll try to find one of those too. I love this sewing kit idea like so much. Okay, so next up we have our tape here, measuring tape. And this one is actually goes up to 120 inches. A lot of them will go to 60 inches, but I just find that having the 120 inches comes in handy sometimes, especially, you know, if you're doing measurements on a person that's maybe plus size, you don't want to make them feel uncomfortable by using a smaller tape. So 120 inch tape is really nice to have that available for a really long tape. You can use one that's retractable as well. I've been gifted some that were funny things. Like I have one that's a cat that I love. That's a little measuring tape that I bring with me. It's usually in my purse, as people love to ask me sewing questions when I'm around town, so I take it with me everywhere. But these ones live in my sewing kit all the time. I definitely use it a lot. So that's definitely another really good option. So the other things I have on here are, well, I guess there's maybe like two more beginner things that would be really good. So a pair of tweezers is going to be really important. These usually come with your sewing machine as well. This one has an angled top, which is really nice. I use tweezers every time I thread a needle. I just think it's a lot easier to actually thread the needle than holding it. I usually have my nails done and they're kind of long, so I usually use them for different things, but right now my nails are really short because we're all quarantined right now, but usually if I just need to do something really simple and small, I'll go ahead and do it with my tweezers and actually thread my needle. So that's another thing that's really great. Some people have asked me before if you could use your tweezers that you tweeze your eyebrows with. And that's up to you, girlfriend. Do what you gotta do sometimes. But I would say that the angled tweezers that come with most sewing machines are the best option for this. It's just gonna help you get in there a little bit easier. That was kind of funny. The next thing is either a little Allen wrench or a mini screwdriver. You can see it's really small. So these are probably, what, an inch or two. Well, I guess we can measure it with our handy dandy measuring tape. So the Allen wrench is 2 inches tall and the mini screwdriver is about 3 inches tall. I've never purchased these. They've always come with a sewing machine. So that's definitely something that whichever one your machine needs in order to change a needle, that will come with your sewing machine as well. All right, and then one other thing I want you to know about is machine oil. So getting yourself some machine oil is going to be important if you're sewing, well, often. If you're sewing every like 6 months or something like that, you really won't have to oil your machine. If you're sewing every single day like I do, I definitely need to be oiling my machines. It has been recommended to me every day. I'll say I probably oil them once a week. But anytime you kind of hear your machine making a little crunchy noise, is usually how I describe it, or you're gonna get more in tune with your machine, and like when it's having little troubles, you can hear it and you'll be able to know. So a lot of times it just needs a little bit of the machine oil, and when you look in your manual for your sewing machine, it'll show you where to oil as well. But if you have questions about that, you can send me a machine to like look through, because every machine is a little bit different with that. So yeah, those are some of the ones that I would definitely put in your sewing kit. Some other stuff that I just think is good for you to know about is that not only is there thread that you're probably used to seeing, but there's a lot of different types of thread. You can see that this one is a lot shinier than this one. And I use large cones of thread because I sew so often, but you probably are gonna have a smaller cone of thread. I don't even know if I could find one in my house right now because I sew too much. I just buy the larger ones. But you definitely could use those smaller ones. They're most likely going to be this type of thread. more often than not, you're going to want to use a polyester thread. It's just a lot stronger than most cotton threads. But if you are going to end up dyeing a garment eventually, polyester thread does not dye. And so you're going to make sure, like, you're going to want to make sure that you're using the right color thread that you want to finish with if you're dyeing a garment. So 100% cotton thread, if you're dyeing a garment in the future, would be a great option that you could use instead of the polyester. And then this shiny thread is, let's see what it's made out of. It's called woolly thread. It's actually more expensive. It's a little bit harder to use, but it's really shiny. And it's supposedly, like, we have a seamstress that makes her own bathing suits for her own bathing suit line, and she uses this along her seams with her serger. And it's really nice for serging, but probably not as good for using in your straight stitch machine. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. I just wanted to mainly prove that there are different types of threads. So when you're sewing, make sure you know that you're using the proper thread for that project. So I also on here, I have a nail file. This is for your nails because so often, especially right now, the fabric that you're using will probably dry out your hands. And if you have a little nail or a little hangnail or something like that, it'll catch on your fabric, it'll hurt your hand a little bit. So I always have a little nail file along with my sewing kit, which I don't think most seamstresses think about. So that's just something extra for you to know about. And I have a random straw as well. So this straw just came from like a reusable cup that I bought forever ago. But anytime I'm making a belt or something I need to turn inside out, it's a lot easier if you use something long and skinny to actually put it over, and then it helps you to turn that belt or turban or anything inside out or right side out. So I always have a little straw with me as well. Plus, it's just good to have reusable straws anyway. But yeah. And then also it comes with your sewing machine, but we've got bobbins. So this is a bobbin right here. This is a clear bobbin, or clear, when I say clear, I mean plastic. So a plastic bobbin, that's going to be pretty typical for any machine that's newer over the last 20, 30 years. And the bobbin actually sits underneath on the, well, we'll get into where the bobbin sits, I guess, next. But I just wanted to show you that the bobbin, what it looks like. So when you open your machine, it should have bobbins that came with it that fit your machine. But we'll talk about bobbins more, don't worry. They're very important for sewing. Two things I have left on here are bias tape. So bias tape and also zippers are great ways to do different finishings. But bias tape is one of those that I think is a really great kind of start to do finishing. So instead of hemming something, you would add bias tape to the end of it. And we can go over that in a future class, but I just kind of wanted to show you what bias tape looked like. And you can also make your own bias tape. That, again, that's probably another whole class in itself. But bias tape is a great thing for you to utilize when you're finishing a garment. And then this is probably one of my favorite tools ever. This is a rotary knife, and it looks like a pizza cutter. And if you extend it out, you can see this is the sharpest, scariest thing in your sewing kit. It can hurt you very bad. It is incredibly sharp. But if you're going to be cutting a ton of fabric, a lot of people use this in quilting as well. You're going to need a self-healing mat. So the mat lays on your table, then you lay the fabric over it, and then whatever pattern you want to cut it into, and then you just, take the rotary knife and cut around your pattern. It can do curves really well. It can do, I mean, we use it to cut everything. I'm going to close it. So there's a little safety on it that closes it. I honestly use my shears the least out of the majority of these things. But I still really love to have them. I have a ton of really great shears, scissors from over the years. So yeah, definitely kind of funny, but I utilize my rotary knife to cut out all of our fabric, and I utilize my snips probably the most often out of all of these pieces. So that's everything that's just sitting on my little tray right here of items to check out. Let's see. So Krista, I'm gonna head back to you and just see if you have any other questions. I love your idea of doing a kind of sewing kit, either one that I could sell that has a couple of these things in it that you definitely need, and then I'll definitely make a list of like the other places to grab them. But yeah, what do you think so far?
I would definitely buy a kit. And I've also realized that I think I have like the very basic, because you kept talking about all the things that come with the sewing machine, and I have just like this little plastic that did not come with didn't come with that much though. So
okay, what's in there?
it's the bobbins. One of those little, the Allen wrench.
Yeah.
It did not come with like a little screwdriver though. And then there's a lot of these other pieces that it's got this. I have no idea what that is.
Okay. That sits on top of your thread. So where you have, we're actually going to go over some of the like parts of the sewing machine next. So I can show you where that goes.
And then I don't know what this is either.
Okay. Let me see. Got it. I've got one of those as well in mine. We'll go over that too.
These little doohickeys.
Oh yeah. So you probably have a lot of feet in there, a lot of presser feet, which is actually on the list to talk about right now, but I think it's a little bit easier to talk about those when we go over the parts of the sewing machine.
Sure. Other than that, I don't have any questions for the tools you've gone over.
Cool. And then you got one of these little brushes. So open it up, and then you've got a little seam ripper. Surprise. So they use that as like a lid for it, because the seam ripper along, you know, it is a blade. It is a little knife on there. And I've never technically hurt myself on a seam ripper with the blade. It's always the pointy part that gets me. So, but yeah, you got a little seam ripper in there too. That's good. There's quite a few pieces in here. The majority of them will just stay in there because the majority of the time you're using other things. You probably don't have a little screwdriver because your machine probably doesn't need it. So it just depends on the machine, which ones they send over. But yeah, good. I'm glad you don't have any questions so far. Do you feel like you have everything you need in order to do like the basic sewing stuff that I talked about? Like, do you have tweezers? Do you have scissors? All of that?
I have scissors. I don't have tweezers that like I don't use for my tape. So
well, that's good to know, because then we can add those as part of this like sewing kit or whatever.
I would totally get a kit. I prefer somebody with expertise to pick out appropriate tools, because there's so many options. So it's nice to see somebody with the experience pick out what they like to use.
Okay, perfect. Well, no matter what, I'll have a list of places where you can buy it, and then maybe we'll maybe in the future I can purchase them at like some kind of a wholesale price, put it all together and send it off too. So that'd be cool. Okay, cool. So let's go to the next part. So we'll get back to the terms of the trade, which is underneath bullet point like 1. And let's go first to the next page down, which is getting to know your sewing machine. And it says, first things first, give it a name. So I have multiple sewing machines. They all have names, mostly because when you're frustrated, you're gonna need to know what to yell at it. So some of my sewing machines have names based on how they sound to me. Some of them are based on their colors. So I have a baby blues singer, for example, that is named Lucy, because it kind of, they all sew a little different. So she kind of chugs along. She's like, like she chugs when she's sewing. And so I imagine, of course, with like the blue as well, that she's kind of like Lucille Ball when she was on I Love Lucy, and when her and Ethel? Lucy and Ethel. That's got to be right. When they're on the line with all the chocolates and they end up having to eat all the chocolates. So for some reason, I love that name for her, and it reminds me of her. So that's why my name is for that one, but this is not her. This one is the singer Confidence. Her name's Connie. I just shortened Confidence for Connie. Listen, you do what you gotta do. You figure out whatever name you want. For some reason, I name all my sergers, which is a different type of machine. I think they're boys for some reason. So they are, and they're all like biblical names. Like there's like Mark, Luke, John. Like I have no idea why. Just whatever feels right to you. Figure out the name. You can also call it a curse word. I've had a lot of people do that because they get really frustrated and they like to say the curse word. So listen, whatever you're feeling, I'm down for it. Okay, so let's go over the parts of the sewing machine. I'm gonna move this tray out of the way and move the machine a little closer so you can see it. All right, how's that? Is that okay? I think it looks good. Okay, so on the third page of your lesson plan, you can see getting to know your sewing machine. And there's a little diagram. You'll also have a diagram that's part of your sewing manual. So if you wanted to pull that out, that might help you as well. Every manual will have some kind of list of parts. But generally, I'm going to point out some of the really important ones. We'll kind of go over it a little bit. Okay, so most sewing machines that are a little bit newer, and by that I mean like in the last 20 to 30 years, are going to have an accessory storage box. And I'm going to try to go by my list that's on your lesson plan. So number 1 on there is an accessory storage box. Oh my gosh, there we go. And some of them pull out, some of them open up this way, and that's where all of those fun little pieces of stuff are sitting that you got out earlier. You might even have one of these. Do you have one of these in your sewing box? Oh, perfect. I think I see it. Yeah, that's close enough. I think they're going for the same thing. So this actually is your screwdriver. So this little edge is what will fit the screw, like for any screws on your machine. So that actually is your little screwdriver. So the accessory storage box is really great because, you know, you can hide all those extra pieces that you're not using right now. And then the second one, let's see, is an extension table. So your sewing machine will have some kind of piece, most likely, that comes off of it. Oh my gosh. Honestly, I use my industrial sewing machine so often, it's just kind of funny to go back to my home one now that I'm at home. So might get a little wonky here. But basically, it can be removed. And usually just takes a little bit of force, but don't break anything. But that can be removed so that if you needed to get underneath your sewing machine, or say you had something like a sleeve you were working on, that's the main time you would want to get around your sewing machine. But for the most part, it's really great to just have a really good base to sew on and have kind of a wider area to sew on, because you're going to want to actually be prepping your work to go into your sewing machine closer to the edge of your sewing machine. So having this extra space to work on is really quite nice. But if you needed to take it off, it's definitely an option there for you. Okay, so next up is our needle plate. This silver area is your needle plate. And basically it's called that because the needle is going to enter and exit through that needle plate. So it's really important that that stays on your machine and connected really well. Honestly, you won't have to do that much with it, and you're gonna be, if you like had a really big issue and you had to get your machine serviced by a professional, most likely they would remove that, clean it out, stuff like that. But for the most part, you're gonna leave your needle plate alone, leave it where it is. And then we've got the needle threader. So there's usually on a newer machine a little piece that comes down. You can push it up and down. And it's kind of difficult. I'll try to like do a close-up later of how to use it. But this far away, you probably won't be able to see it. But basically that little piece would come down, and actually if your needle is in the right position, you'll be able to move forward and then loop your thread around, around the little hook that's part of that. And then it'll actually thread the needle for you. More often than not, it's more of a hassle than it's worth, but if you can get really good at it and practice doing it, then it'll actually thread your needle a little faster for you. However, like I said, for the most part, I just use my tweezers every time to just thread my needle. So you're also gonna have a thread cutter. Mine is around the back side of mine, and it's just a little tiny blade. You won't even be able to really access it. And again, every sewing machine is just a little bit different. So you may or may not, I'll try to get my face in here. So you may or may not have it around the back. Sometimes it's like mine's kind of on the side. You can have one on the side or on the back. Sometimes they're on the back of the foot as well. So it just depends on your machine where it's located. Okay, so then we have, let's see, let's go down a little bit. Their tension, stitch, spool holder. So let's go around the top of the machine next. I'll try to move this for you. So around the top of the machine, you have this little spool, and that's where you're going to put your thread, this little area right here. And what you were showing me earlier in your accessories box probably looks like either one of these. And that actually can sit on top of your thread. It just goes right around this spool pin right here. That's what they call the thing that holds the thread, is a spool pin. And you can attach it to the top of that to where your thread, if you're sewing really fast, sometimes your thread is moving around a little bit and rotating on there. This will hold your thread on there for you so it doesn't come off. And they have different sizes. So one's smaller and one's larger. So it just depends on if you're using a small spool of thread or a larger spool of thread. So that's what those two things are. And then for me, because I use the large thread, the large cones, this does not come with your machine, but I have a needle, a thread extender. Let me pull that around front so you can see it. It's kind of heavyweight, honestly. Like, this is very heavy. You can get these at Joann's. But basically, if you're going to buy a really big cone of thread, you can't fit it around here, around your normal spool pin. It'll just fall off. It won't have the right tension. It won't work. So you're going to want to get a thread extender like this, and you sit the thread over the spool pin right here, hook it over the loop right there, and then you're going to thread normally after that. So this has two pieces. It comes apart right here, and then it has a little screw that holds it together on the bottom. And this piece is quite heavy. I mean, it's metal. I don't know, it looks like cast iron. It cannot be cast iron. It was way too inexpensive for that. But it's a really heavy piece, because as you're sewing, if you don't have a sturdy table to sew on, you know, all of this could be moving around a little bit because of the vibrations of sewing. So this is a really heavy piece on the bottom. Let me see if I can get it back around. And so anytime you're using one of the thread extenders, you can see I have it here, which is pretty close to where my spool pin is. So I sit it around the back of my machine. I place that thread over the top hook, and then I will thread the machine normally, which we'll go over threading the machine here soon. All right, so I'm gonna put that spool pin down. So if you look at the top of the machine on the right-hand side, when you're looking at it, there's gonna be a little bobbin winder, and you can move it back and forth. So in your accessories kit, they always have extra, or your accessory box, they always will give you extra bobbins. This one is already wound, but we'll go over winding a bobbin here soon as well. And your bobbin actually sits over the top of that little pin. And this is where we will take the thread that was on here. We will go around some things that hold the tension on this side, and then we will wind the bobbin. So that way, the thread that you're using on the top of your garment, you can have the same color thread underneath. They do have pre-wound bobbins that they sell at the store, but honestly, it takes a few minutes to wind a bobbin. It's not difficult, and it's definitely going to be something that you're doing often anyway, especially if you're switching thread colors a lot. So we'll show you how to thread a bobbin, no worries there. But I wanted to show you that that's the bobbin winder. And when it is in the neutral position, I guess I could say, because you can push it back and forth. When it's in the neutral position or, like disengaged, then it's just going to sit there. You won't be able to wind it. You actually have to push it towards the little bumper here in order for it to actually wind your bobbin. So I'm going to leave that right there for now, just so we have a reminder of what that little guy is. Let's see, which one is next for you? Do you have any questions so far, Krista? Are you doing okay? Just trying to check in. All good, awesome. Okay, so again, we're just going over like the parts of the machine. We will show you how to thread it and all that stuff here soon too. So it'll make a little bit more sense. All right, so on the top of the machine, there's also just different hooks and things that hold tension. So I think the main thing to understand about sewing is that it's basically like tying a whole bunch of knots. Every single time that your needle goes down, it's going to connect with the bobbin thread, and they're going to tie a knot, basically. So when I talk about tension on a sewing machine, if you have a knot that isn't tight enough, your seam will not be strong. It'll unwind, it'll come apart. So tension on machines is really important because, again, we're just tying a whole bunch of knots. And if your tension is too loose, again, it'll not stay together. You'll have big issues with one of the threads kind of coming out and the other thread staying on. So it's really important to get your thread tension correctly, and we'll go over that as well. But that is the very basics of sewing, is that you're actually just tying a whole bunch of knots. So there's a thread that comes from the bottom and a thread that comes from the top. And the bobbin thread that we were just discussing is the one that comes from the bottom to tie the knot. So let's go over to the needle plate again and just show you. So your bobbin is actually sitting below usually a clear plastic window. That way you can see when your bobbin's about to run out of thread, because you obviously cannot sew without having your bobbin. So if you push the little, it's kind of a textured button to the right, the plastic piece will pop up, and then you have access to the bobbin that is in your machine. And you can see it there. And then the thread, you don't want that thread from the top sitting up there. So just making sure, Krista, that you can see how to open your bobbin chamber. There should be a little, if you want to move your camera to show me that, I can help you with that too. Or I can do a close-up too. Okay, perfect. Okay, so along the needle plate, which is the silver part along the bottom, I just want to make sure before we do anything, is your machine turned off? Yeah, okay, perfect. So there's a little textured piece that you'll be able to move to the right-hand side. So if you're looking at your machine, it'll be on the right side, so the further away spot from you. I'm gonna do a little close-up for you, just 1 second.
Yeah, it's like I'm just not seeing a textured piece.
No problem. Get for you. Alrighty, so this clear piece, and then this little piece is the one I'm talking about.
Oh, I don't have that.
Right. Oh, you don't have that?
No.
You have a different setup maybe?
Yes.
Well, no worries. If you could do, there you go. Could you open your accessories case right here? Like
it's here.
Okay, perfect.
And then
so then there's
here?
Yes, it is. Perfect.
Oh.
Actually, I usually prefer your style of machine a little bit more. So I don't have an example of that here, but that's the type of like bobbin casing that I'm usually utilizing on my industrial machine, which is nice. So in order to get that out, you're gonna wanna make sure your needle is lifted. So you're gonna take, there's a wheel, and you're gonna make sure that you turn it always towards the front of the machine, at least when it's threaded. Yep, so as long as that's lifted, then you can come back and you can actually look at the bobbin casing, and you're gonna be able to see a little lever that it's like a circle, but then there's kind of a spot in the middle that's a little piece of metal that goes across the middle. And you can actually move that, and you can move that little piece of metal and then remove it from the machine. Did you see it?
I think so. I think I got it off.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Is there a bobbin sitting in there? Yes.
This is a bobbin.
So that's the bobbin case. And then the bobbin is the, do you have a metal piece in there that looks like this, or is it plastic?
I don't know how to open this.
So lift that metal piece that goes across the bobbin case again.
Oh.
And then it separates.
And then in here, is that?
Yes. So that's where you will put your bobbin.
Oh, that's, okay.
If there's nothing in there, then they don't have a bobbin in there.
There's a plastic piece. I just don't know how to
So just keep holding, keep holding up that, that metal piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then you should be able to kind of like let it drop out. That kind of releases it. Okay, so maybe the thread, yeah, I was gonna say, if there's any thread or anything, it might have gotten stuck, but I see it now. Well, that's good because your bobbin doesn't have any thread on it, so we can show you how to thread it, so that's good. That's so funny. I haven't seen one of them that had that bobbin casing in a while. So what she did was she had to basically remove her accessory box, which I don't have the same one, but basically she had to remove it. And then there was a little panel that came down, and her bobbin casing sits inside there, whereas mine sits above. So kind of good and bad things about that is that it takes a little bit longer. Let me switch this back around. So it takes a little bit longer to change your bobbin when you have it like that. So that might be, I guess, one negative of having the bobbin that's below the machine, but I actually really like it. And I really like having the metal bobbin casing too. Let me see if that's what they call it on here, so I make sure I'm using the right term. Bobbin cover plate. Yeah, just bobbin case. It looks like it works for that. They might have a different like term for it if you look in your manual as well, Krista, but usually it's just a bobbin case. Well, that's good to know because that's a different, like I said, a different kind of machine. And I didn't get to look at your machine before we started today, but not a problem. We can still work with it. So we'll kind of go over everything, and every machine is similar. No machines are exactly the same, I would say, or maybe there are some, but every machine is incredibly similar. They will all have these pieces, but each manufacturer will put them together in a little bit different way. So kind of think of it like that. So we'll be teaching you just kind of some of the general aspects of this, but what's great is that you have access to me and I can talk you through your individual machines anytime you need it. You just contact me and we'll figure that out, so not a problem. But for now, let's go back to just a few more parts of the sewing machine, and then we'll get to how to thread our machine and how to wind our bobbin, so that today we can do a little bit of our sewing on our sewing obstacle course that we have as well. This is really easy to make, so I'll tell you guys like which parts of it we decided to make and everything, but I want to make sure that we're able to get sewing today too. So some other parts that are just really important for you to know and to understand, probably one of the major parts is your wheel. So you're going to turn your wheel only towards yourself when you're sewing. You don't want to turn it away from yourself like this, like towards the back of the machine. That can unthread your needle and can kind of mess up that locking. Think of it again as it's just making all these little knots. So if you're always moving this wheel towards yourself, then you're keeping the machine kind of always thinking forward and always thinking that the machine, that Connie here, is like ready to make another knot. If you go backwards, you could confuse the machine of what it wants to do, and it can also unthread it, and you might have to start over. So it's always good to just be thinking of moving that wheel towards yourself, not away from yourself. If you do it on accident or a little bit or whatever, not the end of the world. It just could, like I said, unthread the machine, and you don't want to have to start over if you're already like rocking and rolling to move forward. Okay, so the wheel is really important. It's over here. It's going to be in the same general place on every single machine, so that's really important to know. Let's see what else we got here. I can move this a little closer too for you guys. Okay, so I want to go over like just a couple things about your needle plate area and your actual like sewing area. So most machines will have, like we talked about, the needle plate, which is the silver part, and then have some kind of bobbin casing, or like Chris's has it, that'll be on the side. And then all of the machines will have feed dogs, which are the actual like parts that move your machine forward. So if you were to move your wheel towards yourself, your needle would go down into your machine, and mine is turned on. So if you wanted to play around, I would turn your machine off. And then it moves those feed dogs. So the feed dogs feed the fabric into the machine and help it move forward as you're sewing. So those little feed dogs are really, really important. They can get kind of messy sometimes. So what's a good idea is if you wanted to ever clear some of the lint out of there, you could use your little brush that you got in your accessories box, and you could clear out some of the lint. that's in there. So that might be some of the only cleaning you're gonna have to really worry about as part of this, but the feed dogs are really, really important to moving your fabric forward. Okay, and then also on here, mine's a little messy. There we go. You have your feet. So your presser feet are called that because they press down onto the fabric, so presser feet, and they all have different styles. They all do different things. Let's see, there's quite a few feet that you're gonna have in each one of your boxes, each one of your sewing machines. The main one that comes on the front of your sewing, like on your sewing machine when you get it, is probably the one that you're going to utilize the most often. So mine, I was sewing with this foot. Sorry if this is a little blurry, trying to get close up. There we go, hi. So I was sewing with this foot. And then the other one I would probably sew with, because this one has a center spot where you're going to put the thread. This one is more like a thong sandal, because you know these are feet, so they got little toes. So this one's a little bit more of a thong sandal, and you could utilize this one as well. It wouldn't be a problem. It just depends on where you like your thread. So if you wanted to move your needle to the left or to the right, you might want to use this one, but the center one is probably the most universal used one. And then the only other foot I want to show you right now that I want to get into, we're not going to utilize it today, but this is a zipper foot. You can see it has a little area on each side where the needle can go, and that's important because on a zipper, when you're attaching it, you're going to have to move your needle from the left when you're sewing the right side and on to the right when you're sewing the left side. I might have got that mixed up. Right when you're sewing the left when you're sewing the right. Basically the opposite side. And it gets really, really close to those little zipper pulls so that you can actually stitch super close. This will be for a zipper that's exposed. They do sell invisible zipper foots that are usually like 3 plastic pieces that you have to put together to organize. I think in the future we'll do a whole session on just like zippers and stuff like that. And zippers are, I think, a little bit more advanced. So I probably wouldn't start there. But for today, we're going to be utilizing our foot that has, they all do have different names. I have not learned every single name of every single presser foot, but the one with the center is going to work for us. And Krista, which one did yours come with? What does yours have on it?
That's got the same one, but I only have one other one, which is, I think, the zipper one.
Yes, correct. So you've got just 2 feet that came with yours. And honestly, that's why I'm really only talking about these 2 right now. I have to tell you, there's a lot of different contraptions that people will try to sell you for sewing all the time. Perfect. That's just like this one. Mine just has a little clear spot, so you're good. But they'll try to sell you a lot of different stuff that promises to make things easier on sewing. I don't utilize the majority of it, honestly. So what I tell people is like, just stick with what you know and then slowly learn new skills or slowly learn some of the new feet. You're not going to make a dress your very first day or anything like that, but people really like to, move fast with sewing. But remember, it's a practice. It's also very like meditative, which is nice. So if you do know what you're doing and you're creating something new and exciting, hearing the machine moving forward and knowing that you're kind of taking those little steps with your little baby presser feet towards a finished garment is kind of fun. All right, so we're going to move on with that single foot right here. And so I'm going to show you that there's usually a little piece. Let me see. So there's usually a little spot that moves up and down, and that's on the back of your presser foot. See if I can get this lined up here for you, actually. So this is the back of my machine. And on the back of my, where I'm going to actually attach my foot, so on the back of where my needle is attached, there's a little button. And if I put the foot underneath it, there's a little spot on the foot that's kind of a metal bar. I'll bring it around so you can see a little better now on this side. So that metal bar is actually where I'm going to line up my foot. And then you're going to hold in that button on the back, which will open up the spot where you can disconnect and reconnect new feet. And if you wanted to, you could attach, play around with attaching different feet to it. But basically you're going to hold that button and it'll open up your spot to where you're going to attach your foot across that little metal bar. So if I push that button now while my foot's attached, it will drop the foot. And if I put the foot underneath it, and there's actually a lever that can lower your presser foot right here. If I lower my presser foot over it, then it'll actually connect on that bar spot as well. So if I lift it back up, it's attached. Now on the back here is the button. So if you wanted to disconnect it, you press the little button on the back. And then if you wanted to reattach it, you would line up this curved spot over the bar on your foot, and then you could lower your presser foot on top of that slowly, and it will connect it for you. Now, I have never tried to do that on camera or anything, so I understand if that's a little bit confusing. I'll try to explain that maybe within each class. But if you get your presser foot attached, there's no reason that you would need to take it off or anything like that unless you were switching feet to that zipper foot, which will be quite a while. So if you can get your foot attached to it, then you're going to be good to go for sewing a basic straight stitch or zigzag, anything like that. So are you able to connect your presser foot, Krista?
Yes, mine doesn't have any connection. It's just a plastic piece and it can clip, like it just slides off and clips back on. It's like a
perfect. So like we were talking about, every machine is slightly different, but there's always a little spot in your manual, and you can definitely connect with me if you have questions about what the heck your manual is saying. You can always ask me and let me know. So your foot is now attached, and that's going to be really important in order to move forward. So make sure your foot is attached. And then I'm going to set it up to where my machine, we're going to be staring at the machine together. So let me turn it a little bit. Let me just get this set up for you. Alrighty. I'm gonna hold this now. So we might get a little shaky for a couple minutes. Let me just get my candle out of the way. There we go. Alrighty, so on the side here, I have my machine plugged in. Mine has two different plugs. So one actually plugs into the wall for electric, and one is actually the foot. So on the floor, I have a little foot and my socks and everything, my little socks that have wiener dogs on them. So that's actually your press foot. There we go. I'm going to get it all organized. And you're actually going to push down on that very slowly when you start. Think of it like driving, like you're just steering and driving your fabric. But when you're pushing down on the gas, your machine will move forward. So what we're going to do to start is we're just going to turn on our machine, which takes it from the 0 to the 1, basically. And then our machine turned on. Mine has a light that turns on. And then we're going to actually learn how to thread our machines right now. So mine's currently threaded. I'm going to unthread it. And to unthread it, I'm just going to pull the thread from where my spool pin is, or my spool is around the back with my extender. I'm just going to pull it out. It should pull pretty easily. Unless it's stuck on the little thing. There we go. So I'm just going to pull it out. And now my machine is unthreaded. And then for me, what I'm going to do now is also take out my bobbin. I do have a threaded bobbin right now, but I think I have an extra one so that we can learn how to first thread our bobbins. Alrighty. I'm going to have to set this up one more time. Sorry, guys. Just a second. It is difficult to thread your machine with one hand. So I'm going to suggest that you do it with 2 hands. In order to be able to do that, because of the setup, I'm just going to have to move my little presser foot onto the table. So you don't need to do this, but I'm going to do it just so that I can show you everything. Alrighty, here we go. Okay, so this is kind of a good starting spot. So what we're going to do first is wind our bobbin. So remember, the bobbin is sitting along the top here. I have an empty bobbin now. And then we're going to put the thread on our spool pin. You just sit it over the top. And if you wanted to, you could have where you add the little piece over it. You could have it sit like that with your thread sitting below it. Up to you. Sometimes I use these and sometimes I don't. It just depends on if your thread is being unruly or not. For me, you know, I have the thread extender. And I'm just going to grab my snips as well, just to get the extra thread out of the way, because I'm making a little bit of a mess over here. There we go. Alrighty, so on the top of your machine, you guys like my office back here? I got my fancy diploma. I actually have 2 diplomas, one in the arts, Bachelor of Arts, one of Sciences, and they're both sitting in there right now. I need to get a second frame. Very fancy. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our thread. Are you ready to go, Krista? Perfect. All right, so we're gonna take our thread, and then again, each machine is a little bit different, but I just wanna show you the way mine does it. And actually a lot of new machines have little directions on them that are numbered. You can see right here. So what we're gonna do is take our thread and hook it. Very hard to do one-handed. Next time I'll have my husband record me on how to thread your machine so he can move with me too. So you're gonna hook it around the back right here. I want you to think of threading your machine kind of like flossing your teeth. So it is good to do it with 2 hands and to hold the thread with a little bit of tension between your 2 fingers. So you can hold it kind of like this. 2 fingers on your right hand, 2 fingers on your left hand, and you're going to be moving and flossing your machine. So have a little bit of tension between the 2. Okay, so then on this machine, we're going to hook it around the back here. And then in order to wind our bobbin, we're actually going to follow the directions on the top here, this number 1 and then 2. So if you actually take your thread, you can see that we already did number 1. And right now it's telling us to go around this little piece. It looks right here just like a little screw, but that's actually a spot underneath it that you can thread your thread through. So if you can see, mine's coming from the back here and then going actually in between the machine and the kind of like sandwich it. So between the 2 pieces there. And then you're just going to take your thread. Again, it's easier to do with 2 hands when you're not having a shaky camera too. I'll fix that. But you're going to go around that. And then you're going to come all the way down to your bobbin. And you're going to wrap the thread around your bobbin. So I just went around. So let me do that correctly really quickly with both of my hands. So I'm going to go around that hook and then I'm going to catch it on, basically this is creating some tension on the bobbin winder. And then I'm going to go around and I'm going to spin that thread around my bobbin. My machine and what I'm doing right now is technically counterclockwise motion. Some machines might be clockwise. And then I'm going to actually move the bobbin from its neutral position where we started and click it towards that little bumper. Alrighty, so from here, you're actually going to put your foot on your sorry, it's funny because I'm gonna have to do this with my hand in order for the video to work. You're gonna just start winding your bobbin, and the important part of it clicked over right here is so that your bobbin winds instead of your needle moving up and down. By moving this from the left to the right and clicking it into place, you're actually disengaging your needle so that your needle's not going up and down and moving a bunch of times and potentially hurting your machine. But it looks like I actually did it backwards. So when you wind your thread around your bobbin, I'm actually going clockwise. That was my mistake. So I just wind my extra thread all the way around. And then you can trim off any extra thread, and I always throw extra thread onto the ground so that it's not on your project. Okay, so basically I'm just pushing down on my foot. And you can start slowly. You can start slowly, but you don't want your bobbin to be wound kind of unevenly. So you don't want to be slow and then fast and then slow and then fast. Once you know your bobbin is positioned correctly, you have it wound correctly, you just want to go kind of fast in order for it to be wound nice and tight. So if you're creating basically a bobbin and you put the bobbin into your machine and it's not wound tight and it's loose and it's messy, then it won't be able to actually connect with the top thread in order to make all those little knots. So it's important to have this be pretty consistent. So I'm gonna keep winding my bobbin. I'll show you guys. All right, so now we're gonna just check in with Krista and see how you're doing. And I can see you moving some thread around. That's good. Good sign.
Yeah, I don't know that I like got it so even. I think I went the wrong direction at first. And then I had to loosen some because it doesn't look so tight. It's,
okay, so yeah, you can, if you have like a loose, if you finish and you have like a loose bobbin, you can stop winding it at any point. You can remove it. Here, I'll show you. You can move it back and then remove it from your machine. And then you could trim your thread right here and you could basically unwind it a little bit. I'm gonna keep winding this one, but you don't wanna have a uneven bobbin. You don't want it to be, if you have to trim it, you should just use the bobbin thread that you have on there. And luckily for our project, you won't have to use too much, but you don't always have to wind a bobbin all the way full in order for it to work. It'll still work no matter how much thread it has on it. So if you find that halfway through your bobbin isn't looking so good, you can unwind it to a spot where it looks really good. And then you can actually just sew from that point. And that was definitely my mistake. I think I said counterclockwise, but it looks like clockwise, and winding your thread around that bobbin is actually the way to go. So
yeah, I'm struggling.
Struggling? Do you want to move your camera towards it and I can try to help out?
Can you see that? No.
Not really. That's the like unfortunate part about the video.
Video. Yeah, this light in this room is not the brightest, so I don't really.
Do you want to describe it to me? So do you have your spool pin with your thread on it and you've got it on there? Have you hooked it around the back of your machine, the thread?
So I've got that part sorted. I just can't like seem to get the actual, I don't know what to do with the end of the thread here. Like, I don't know how short are you supposed to keep it before you start the winding.
Okay. So there is a little hole if you wanted to. I don't usually do this, but there is a little hole. It's hard to see on here. That you could put the thread through. You can do that instead of winding it around. And then you can probably hold, you know, a couple of inches. So if you put your thread through that hole, then you don't have to wind it around clockwise like I did. I'm just so used to doing it that way. I find it semi-annoying to put it through the hole, so I guess that's why. But you can put it through that hole and then you can kind of hold just the slightest bit of tension on that piece that you have through the hole and leave a couple of inches that you're holding out. And then you can start to wind it and eventually just release the thread once you feel like it's gone around once or twice.
I don't know what I'm doing. But it's like there's the bottom part. It's going now. The way I'm starting it, I don't think is right.
Okay. So have you tried, let's see, maybe starting off a little, well, if you're starting off a little slow and then it's starting to go and you've got a good bobbin, after
Does
the
it
first
matter?
few rotations, I think you're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's going now.
Yay, that's so
And
exciting.
then how full are you supposed to
So it'll
have
actually
it
stop itself on most machines.
when it's full?
Exactly. So give me just 1 second. I want to show you something that just happened on mine that I caught early. That is not good. So when I went to I was going to take off my bobbin. When I went to keep threading it, see, my thread got caught underneath my bobbin winder. That can mess up your machine. So I caught that early. And so I'm just going to stop. I don't need to wind it anymore. And I'm going to remove it. You see how it was like sitting right underneath there, even in a perfect circle. That's a little culprit of disaster. So what I'm going to do is just trim off my extra thread. And that's plenty of thread on there for a bobbin. If you can get it going evenly all the way around, that's obviously best, especially if you're going to be sewing for a long time with the same color thread. But for what we're doing today, we're just learning how to wind it, how to get started, how to not be scared to wind it. That's important. You got to have that confidence. And then next up, we're going to learn how to thread our machine, which in like college, I went to school for theater as well. Basically, I started in music and then switched to musical theater, then costuming, then fashion. So I have a lot of different sides of my career. But in college, we would do like threading races. So we're not going to race each other today, but like getting really used to the physical motions of threading your machine or threading any machine. They're all the same motion and same movement. So after a while, you'll get really used to it and you won't have to worry about like, where does each thing go? It's almost like second nature when you move through it.
So it auto stops. So then I just it did auto stop. So that was
perfect. Yeah, that's great. Then you've got a really full, beautiful bobbin. Yep. So you can just move it from the right side to the left side, and then you can snip the bobbin thread, and you should have a little bobbin that looks just like this. Beautiful. Oh, that's the most beautiful bobbin. And that's way better than mine. Okay, so next up, we're gonna put our bobbin into its place before we thread our machine. You can do this after you thread your machine too, but since we're on the bobbin and we already have it out, it's no problem. So Krista, I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna do mine, and then yours is a little different, so we'll go through how to do yours, okay? All right, let me move this. You can see my beautiful plant. All right, so for me, putting my bobbin into its case, it even has a little diagram, which is really nice, but I'm gonna take my bobbin and leave it with a little bit of thread sticking out. And the important part when you're putting it in on this type of machine where it's top loaded, this is a little bit more important for my type of machine than it is for yours, Krista. Yours is a little different. You're going to put the thread in just the way it is on the diagram. So I don't want to put the thread in where it's coming out the opposite side. I want to put it in where it's coming out the side that is on the diagram. So I'm just going to sit my bobbin into its case, and then there's a little notch right here on the machine. And it's a little bit blurry. I'm trying to see if I can get it for you guys. There's just a little notch right there. That's a little metal notch. It's the same as on the diagram right here. All I'm gonna do is hook the thread behind that little metal notch. You can kind of see it a little better, I think, there. And then I'm going to bring my thread all the way along the machine. Move this top thread. Along the machine, you can see that there's a little spot right here for the thread to go through. And then if I bring it underneath the needle plate and back forward, this is actually a little cutter. So I just pull it and it actually cut my thread for me right there. And so on a top loading one, that's all you have to do. You actually don't have to like do anything else with it after that. You're just going to reattach your plastic piece by putting in the side that has the little notch right here. You're putting that side in first, and then you're just pushing down on the opposite side. And then your bobbin right now is ready to go. You don't have to do anything else for it. All right, so now we're gonna check out Krista's bobbin, which is a little bit different. So Krista, you should have a bobbin case. Yep, perfect. So what you're gonna do is when you have a bobbin, let me get one. When you have a bobbin, oh, actually I might have a machine that has one. Just give me 1 second. Yay, I do. Oh no! Drop the bobbin. Okay, so I do actually have a machine that has a bobbin casing like yours. I have a lot of machines, like a lot. This one actually has a metal bobbin. That's why I was asking. It's a little odd to me that yours has plastic bobbins, but a metal bobbin case. But hey, you know, whatever. You have a Singer, right? Yeah, Singer's just, I don't know, maybe they're just being cheap with their bobbins or something. I don't know why. So this is the bobbin casing that she has. Go back on my screen real quick. There we go. And the little metal piece that she was pulling up earlier looks like this. And that's nice because it basically, let me think of how to explain this. Like it releases your bobbin from your machine when you pull up this little lever. That's all it really does. When you put this into your machine, you don't have to have that lever held up, but sometimes just to hold it a little bit easier, I'll hold on to that little lever and I'll put the bobbin casing into the machine. It's just a little bit easier to handle that way, so you can do that. So you're going to take your bobbin and you're going to insert it into the case, but you're going to leave a little string out. And then it's a little bit hard to see, but there's a little metal piece that's attached with a screw on here. You're going to take the string or the thread, and you are going to find the little notch in your bobbin casing. Oh gosh, it's hard to do when I'm not looking at it. There we go. So you find the little notch in your bobbin casing, and then you're going to lift the thread up until it reaches that point where the opening is. And then you should be able to move the thread through that point. So you want me to show you again? Oh, I think you're on mute, babe. Perfect.
Okay, so I got it in the notch, but then I don't know where to go from there.
So then lay the thread along the, mine's kind of curved. So once you get in the notch, yep, you kind of just slide it along that, and then it'll go to that point. Yes. Yeah, right? That's perfect. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is a little above beginner, but I'm just going to let you know that your bobbin casing that you have has a little bit more flexibility with tension. So your machine, and every machine has this, but it's a lot easier to control on a bobbin casing machine like yours, is that basically I've been told that if you can hold, like you see how I'm holding the thread and I'm holding it down, yes, just like that, you should be able to adjust the tension with the little metal screw that's right next to the notch. And if your tension, if you can't pull your thread out, then your tension is too tight. So if you can just pull your thread out, then you're good. Does it feel too tight or anything? Okay. So normally what you should be able to do to have good tension on one of these, and again, this is a little intense, so I'm not gonna have you change this until we change the top tension first, because that's a little bit easier, and that's the one that most people mess with. But usually you should be able to, and I think mine's too tight too, actually like drop your hand a little bit and without your bobbin falling out and onto the floor like mine did, you should be able to see your casing drop slightly. So if your tension is too tight, it won't move at all. And if it's too loose, then you won't be able to hold that thread at the top. It'll just kind of slide down along that thread. All right. So we're not going to adjust anything about yours now. The manufacturer, when they're making these machines, kind of sets it for you in the beginning. But if this casing, when you put it in there, was like automatically moving down, then that is way too loose of a tension. And basically, you would just want to use your little screwdriver thing they gave you to tighten that screw. And if it was way too tight, you would use that little screwdriver to loosen that screw. And that is how you control how tight your bobbin thread is on your machine. But I didn't know we were gonna have to go over that today, so hopefully we don't have to change it. Let's get to inserting your bobbin into the machine. So the bobbin casing that you have has this little extra piece of metal, and oh my goodness, Amanda, I swear. See, the bobbin can come out pretty easily. That's why I told you earlier I was surprised yours wasn't coming out. Okay, so you've got this little metal piece right here. And basically you're just going to line that metal piece up with where it would fit in your machine, just like a puzzle. And the way I would do that is I would open up your little metal lever, and I would kind of hold that metal lever between two fingers like this. And then I would insert it into the machine where this metal piece fits.
I think mine has this. Mine has this too. Is this supposed to be over this first? Like it's got this. Like,
so
these go together?
Yes.
I don't.
Yes.
Does this go before I put it into the machine?
So normally that's sitting in the machine.
Oh, did I like pull this out of the machine? I think I did.
I haven't seen it out of the machine, but you might be able to just pop it back in there.
Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. We will test your machine before we get it going. But yeah, that's basically the piece that brings down the thread from the top and loops it around. So that usually stays within the machine. Have you used this machine like where it was like not working? It is possible that that should be attached, and we might have
never used it. So
okay. Did you buy it new? Okay. You want to see if the hubby can help? That's fine. Yeah, we can still thread the top of the machine and learn that. But I'm more than happy to wait a few minutes if you guys want to see if you could fit it in there.
I think he got it. And so then I
Yay!
have to put that on there. Oh no, it's like coming out again. It's not staying in there.
Well, no matter what, send me, or I think you just did before the class, but I can look at the manual for you and just make sure that I can help you through that.
I don't know how I got it out to begin with. Maybe there's this piece too.
Oh, goodness.
I don't know if that goes in there. On top. You go ahead.
It's all good. So here's what I think we should do now, Krista, is we can still thread the top, but until that is fixed, you won't be able to sew. So that's important to know, which is unfortunate, one, but we can get it fixed. Those pieces are usually sitting inside the machine and usually attached. So that seems like there's something bigger that is an issue with that. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to look at the machine model number that you have, and we're going to get that figured out on a private call. But for now, why don't we just figure out threading the top of the machine, and then we'll just end for today. And then I can always just show you guys stitching our obstacle course next time. We'll do that. Yay. Okay, cool. So let's go back to just threading the top of the machine. Bobbins are always, always, always like a finicky issue more than the top of the machine. So don't worry, just about every single class, somebody, multiple people have machines that have bobbin issues or something's going on. So what's important again is troubleshooting, and we're gonna figure that out once I'm able to look at the model number for your machine. Okay. So we're gonna go back to threading the top of the machine. Again, this is best to do when you think of it like flossing. It's very important. So you're gonna have your thread. You can have it spun around one finger, between two fingers, but there's gonna be tension in your thread. Excuse me. All right, so I'm gonna turn it around. I need like a whole setup now with like lights and stuff, and a whole thing that like holds my camera above my machine. Listen, my birthday's soon. I think I know what I'm asking for besides those roller skates now. Okay, so just like we started last time, always you're gonna start with your thread on your spool pin. For me, it's gonna be back here on my extender. And then you're going to have your thread in both hands. I know I have it in only one hand. You're going to hook it around the back here. You're going to follow your numbers if you have a newer machine, but every machine has a hook in the back, and then it goes down the machine. And as you can see here, I have a number 3. You're going to go around that hook, and you're going to go back up the machine. And then this hook here, which my number 4 is right at the top, you can move this hook by moving your wheel, by spinning your wheel towards you. So if this hook is like too far down or too hard to reach, you can spin your wheel towards yourself in order to make that easier to reach. And then you're gonna go down the machine again once you've hooked it on there. So every machine has kind of an N pattern. So think of it like a backwards N. So if you write an N by going down to up, down again, and then back up, when you're threading the machine, you're gonna go down, up, down. So it's that N pattern. And then again, every machine is slightly different. Let me see if I can set this up for you so I can use both hands. Pretty good shot. So I'm going to take my thread between both my hands, and once I've done the N pattern that we just finished, near the needle of every machine there is a little hook. So if you can see right here at the top of mine, I have a little hook. Again, this is the time when it's most important to think of it as flossing. So like we did with the bobbin winder where we put the thread between two metal pieces, we're going to do that again. So I'm going to hold my thread between my two hands with some tension, and then at the top of my needle, I'm going to push my right hand back a little bit, and that actually allows the thread to slide between the two metal pieces there and allows it to be in the hook that it needs to be in for my machine to work properly. So as soon as you get to that point, Krista, just let me know. Give me a little thumbs up.
I'm mostly there. I don't think it's latching on anything when I slide it between the metal pieces.
Okay. So yours also, I'll double check yours for threading, but yours also might have, sometimes they have a hole or something that you would put it through. So as long as you can get it hooked on something near the top, will be good for you. And you won't be able to sew yours today because of the bobbin issue, but I want to show you how to use your automatic threader so that in the future you know how to use it. Well, you can still thread it today. That's fine. You can thread the top. So the automatic threader, see if I can get a little bit better shot there for you. So the automatic threader moves up and down, and you can move that up and down anytime, but it won't move forward. So if I push it all the way down and then I push it towards the back, you can see that I'm moving it towards the back. That won't move towards the back unless your needle is lined up correctly for the little, there's a little hook between these two. So unless your needle is lined up correctly to where that little hook can actually go through the eye of the needle, it won't move forward. So let me just show you. If my needle was lower, I can't move it forward, it messes up. So when my needle is actually just sitting in the very right spot, I can take this thread that I have, line it up down along the needle, or sorry, you can take the thread and line it with this little hook to the left. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to hook it here. I hate this part. Here's what I would do. Hook it here and then hold the tension higher. And then you're actually going to look at the eye of the needle and hook it on the little hook that is going through the eye of the needle. And then slowly pull that through the back of the machine. You're slowly going to move your left hand forward, like towards yourself. And you'll see there's a little tiny thread loop back here behind the needle. So I now have my thread through the eye of the needle. And I could just pull it. I got a really long thread right now. A really long thread. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to snip it. So for me, even doing that right now, I find it more frustrating to use the automatic threader than I do to just use my tweezers or just to use my finger to thread the needle instead. So I'm going to just show you. I usually trim it after I thread it because you want a really nice clean finish right here. If you were going to use your hand to thread your needle, then you're actually going to want to lick your finger and put that on the back of the needle. That's a little bit more attracting than actually most people like lick their thread. I snip my thread and I lick the back of my needle, which right now you don't want to share a sewing machine with somebody because, you know, there's a pandemic going around. But for me, I prefer to use my angled tweezers and thread my needle that way instead. And if you ever feel like the top, you can kind of even see it right there, is getting a little unruly, then you can just snip it. And I prefer to, like I said, just use my angled thread or my angled tweezers to get the thread through the eye of the needle. And then the really important part before you start sewing is you don't want your thread just kind of hanging around anywhere. You actually want to put your thread through the toes of your presser foot. So you actually want that out the back, but you want it to be sitting between the toes of your presser foot. It's going to be a lot safer for you to get started sewing. And then the very last step, once you've threaded everything, once your bobbin is in place, is to lower your needle with your hand. So I'm just hand cranking my wheel, going down. You're going to go down one time, and you're going to see right here underneath, there's another little loop. Well, that loop is actually your bobbin thread. So now you have your bobbin thread and your top thread through your machine. And then it's really important to have kind of a tail along your thread. And a lot of people are like, okay, well, how long do you think the tail should be? I usually make sure the tail is at least as long as my fingers out past the back of my machine. And that's important because if for some reason you were to crank your needle or crank your wheel, turn your wheel backwards here, then your needle would unthread. So you don't want to do all that work and get your needle threaded and everything and then have it just all of a sudden unthread. That's super frustrating. So I always keep a little bit of a tail out the back. And if you feel like you have too long of a tail, you can always snip it. It's not a problem. But I always leave a little extra out there. Now, the one last thing I want to talk to you guys about is about the tension on your sewing machine. So, Krista, you can still check this out, and then once we get that bobbin figured out, we'll be good to go. So I want to talk about tension, and then I want to talk about the movements that you do every time you're sewing. So every time you're sewing, you're going to pull that thread out the back. And then every time you're sewing on a project, and I'm going to be sewing the straight lines of my sewing obstacle course that I'll show you guys. Basically, it's straight lines, it's a square, it's a curve, and then it's a heart. So you can always end with a heart, which is nice. But to learn how to sew the straight lines, I just drew on a piece of fabric that I had. This is linen. I drew on the piece of fabric with a Sharpie some straight lines. So every time before I get started sewing, I'm going to pull my tail out the back. I'm going to sink my needle, which by moving my hand wheel towards myself, lowers my needle. So I'm going to sink the needle or lower the needle, and then I'm going to lower the presser foot. So on my machine, my presser foot lever that lowers it, which I really should have talked about in the very beginning, so I apologize for that, is around the side of my machine. So basically, a lot of them are around the very back of the machine, and here's my thread cutter I talked about earlier, around the very back of the machine. Mine is kind of around the inside. So you're going to find your actual like presser foot lever, and you're going to, once you've done your tail out the back, once you've sunk your needle by moving your hand wheel towards yourself on the spot of the project where you want to start, then you're going to lower your foot. And those three motions every single time will ensure that your machine is basically ready to sew. If you started sewing and pushed down on your foot before you had lowered your presser foot, it'll mess up your project. You can technically start sewing if your needle is up. You could start sewing now. I find that that's very harsh on your machine. So in order for your machine to get started, you really just want to make sure that it's your needle is sunk into your project, because then you know exactly where you're starting on your project. So that's a really good option too. And then the very last thing is how to hold your project. So if you see in here, you see where my presser foot is on the inside of my machine. If I leave my hand right here, this little guy that holds your needle in place actually moves up and down. Let me lower my... All right, so I put my foot back on the ground so I can actually press on it. So if I keep my hand right here, you see how dangerous that is? It could hit my hand at any point. So what you're gonna wanna do is not keep your hand on the inside of your machine whenever possible. You're going to want to keep your hand, one hand kind of on the back of your project, holding here, and then the other one kind of organizing it in the front. So it's kind of two motions. See if I can get a good shot for you. You're going to move forward by holding on kind of near the edge of your machine and then out the back of your machine. Do not put your hand underneath the machine here. And then you're just going to sew along your straight line. And then when you get to the end of your straight line, you're going to press your back stitch. So most of the time they're sitting pretty close to where you've threaded your machine. Mine is right here. I'm actually pressing this button and I'm not even pressing on my foot that's on the floor. So, you know, or on my pedal that's on the floor. So I'm pressing this button and it's automatically doing it for me. I think a common misconception is that you have to have like a whole big long back stitch. You only need, you know, 2 or 3 back stitches, and then you're going to stitch forward again. And then once you've come to the very end of that line with your back and then forward stitching, that's when you're going to stop. So I don't like to stop where I've stitched all the way down and then I back stitch 3. Some people stop there. That's fine and it'll hold, I'm sure, but I stitch the last 3 forward just to finish my line really neatly and cleanly where I intended to finish the line instead of a few stitches back where my back stitch was. So then I'm going to lift my needle by hand cranking the wheel towards myself. I'm going to raise my presser foot by raising the lever. And then if I find that my project is stuck on my machine, it is a really easy solution for that. You're just going to think of your machine. It's like maybe your machine thinks it's in the middle of sewing still. So you're going to move your hand wheel towards yourself about a 1/4 turn, and that will release your project from your machine for you. So that's a really easy way. A bunch of people are like, my machine is stuck on my, or my project is stuck on my machine. Oh gosh, what am I gonna do? Well, if you turn that hand crank just towards yourself, a 1/4 turn, then whatever process, like step of the process of making that connection from the top to the bottom that your machine was in, it kind of releases it from doing that, that knot, tying that knot. So just a little hand, you know, wheel moved 1/4 turn towards yourself will release your project from your machine. All right, so I've got my project sitting here now. I'm just going to snip off my extra threads and check out to see how well I did. Hopefully I did a straight line since, you know, you're taking this class from me. All right, so I didn't do too bad, especially since I was talking and holding my project and the camera and everything. Not too bad. So it's kind of hard to see. I would probably use a white thread. So I made a black line. I have black thread on my machine. And I didn't actually, so if you can see, I didn't do my back stitch along the top. I only did it at the bottom. So my back stitch along the bottom ensures that my project from this point will not come undone. But if you can see my stitch at the beginning where I didn't back stitch, look how easy that is to come undone. So that's why it's important to back stitch at the beginning of your project and at the end of your project. So most machines right now that are newer machines have an auto tension. So auto is really where you're going to want to stay. That's the easiest spot. But if you look on your lesson plan, I believe it's on, let's see, the 5th page. On the 5th page in the center, this is the best way to deal with tension. So as you're sewing, sometimes you'll find that the thread on the bottom or the thread on the top isn't quite lined up the way that you'd like for it to be. Well, I have a handy little, oh yeah. So the first thing that you want to do when you're frustrated is to stay calm. To stay calm, take in a deep breath. And these are helpful things, a whole thing on needle and thread, machine tension, and then this one's for sergers, but that's again more complicated. But for now, just looking at this center one. So to stay calm, to take a deep breath, and this is how to organize your thread. So if you can actually see on your project that your thread is locking really nicely and creating these little knots in between. And I'll show you, see if my project looks good. My project looks pretty good. So it's almost like you can see where each stitch is. So that's a good sign when you can see the stitch on both sides where it's going into the fabric. Now, it's a bad sign if the one on the bottom is basically like a straight line, and the one on the top, you can see the little indentions where it's actually going into the fabric. And the same for the opposite. So for when your thread on the top of your project or on the right side, the good side of your project is straight along the top, and when it's like lying on top of your project, that means your knot did not fully tie. Your project is not going to stay together well or easily. So what's important is that if you know whichever side you were working on, if you can see the straight line on either side of your project, then you know that you can actually adjust your little tension here in order to fix that. So a -1 would be a looser tension. The upper thread, if it was too tight or the bottom was too loose, then you need to decrease your tension. So you move that to a lower number, so -1. And then if your upper thread is too loose or your bobbin thread is too tight, then you would increase the tension to a higher number. So that's the last thing I just wanted to show you guys for today. And that is the most frustrating thing for sure that I find that most seamstresses have had. But we are gonna figure out with Krista what's going on with her machine, get it fixed. And for today, that's all we're gonna get through. But don't worry, next time we're gonna go through your sewing obstacle course. We're gonna learn how to do corners. We're gonna learn how to do curves. We're gonna learn how to sew the heart and everything. And we're gonna make sure that your tension on your machines is perfect. But for today, I just wanted to thank Krista for being my very first virtual sewing class ever. So thank you so much, Krista, and what great suggestions you had for the sewing kits and everything. I really, really appreciate that. And we're gonna end the class for now, but don't worry, there's so much more to come. So thank you so much, Krista, and you guys have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.